Greetings. Welcome to another module of the Permission Movement Experience. My name is Lynn Hawkins. I am so excited to be your host today for a wonderful woman and a topic that is very close to my heart. It is around story. Our whole theme for the Permission Movement Experience has been around story. But this is the piece that most people miss. It's like, what's the roots of the story? How does that story definition actually relate to me and my story? And what do I do with all this information? How's it going to help me going forward? What does it do for me as it relates to my business? Well, we're going to talk about business as unusual and story leverage and something that she has come up with called Thrive. So, again, my name is Lynn Hawkins. I'm the founder of the P3 Academy for Social Entrepreneurship and the creator of the Permission to Be Powerful book, which we have a co-author of, as well as the Permission Movement and the Permission Movement Experience. So welcome. If you care to find out how you can participate in the Permission Movement Experience and how you can help make a difference in the world, in the lives of girls and women who are impacted by circumstances that have landed them in foster care or in the juvenile detention system or in prison, even women who are transitioning out of the military, then you want to read a little farther down the event page and see what that's all about and go to permissionmovement.org. I said that again, it's permissionmovement.org. And you will be introduced to how you can play with us as we're doing things to help these girls and women. And today, it's all about you. It's all about how you can understand story so that it has more of an opportunity to benefit you and to help you to just go leaps and bounds towards your desired outcomes, your destination, your dreams. So today's guest, as I had mentioned, is also co-author, Dr. Monikah Ogando. She is an executive business mentor, a speaker, trainer, and she's co-CEO of a company called CEO Mastery. I love that. And today she is going to bring this hot topic to you and to me, and we're just going to dive in and get right to it. Hi, Monikah.
Hi, Lynn. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so happy that you are here because I want to hear all about this topic of story leverage and how we can merge it into what benefits us for business. So tell us a little bit about how you got on this journey to support women in business and women entrepreneurs, and why are you so passionate about this?
Well, I have a movement. I, too, am a creator and founder of a movement called When Women Thrive. And as you know, my research in psychology was about the science of success and matched that with the other doctorate in comparative religions. And it really got me to the bottom line of the story that is in the human condition, no matter what religion, no matter what tradition, no matter whether you have no religion at all or no tradition at all, there's always this underlying story that belies the human experience. And I was fascinated to explore it from the comparative religions angle, but also from the psychology angle, which one of the things that I find so interesting, because as you know, you and I both are lovers of words, the word psychology comes from the Greek word psyche, which stands for soul. And somewhere along the line, it got lost in translation as the study of the mind instead of the study of the soul. And so for me, why I'm so passionate about this is because I've noticed throughout my research and in my personal experience that when you teach a man, for example, how to thrive, then his family thrives. He gets to go to golf with his buddies. He creates generational wealth for his lineage. But when women thrive, it's not just their families that prosper. It's their communities. It's the schools around them. It's not only their children, but their friends' children, their sisters' children, etc. And it's not just about generational wealth, it's about community wealth. And it's about lifting, like it says, a rising tide raises all boats, right? And so for me, I was like, well, then let's help the people that help everybody. It's like, okay, that's common sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, when I started out of college, my first career was as a financial planner, and I noticed that a lot of my clients, about 99% of my clients that were high net worth clients, were entrepreneurs. I didn't have any trust fund babies. I didn't have a leisurely, elite woman who was sitting on alimony or like that, or divorce, settlement. People who strapped on their boots and went to work and built their wealth from their own effort, from their own work, from their own passion and commitment. And so their tolerance for risk was different. The way that they viewed wealth and how to grow it was different. Their fear about losing was different, and their passion for winning was higher, right, than somebody who just kind of like scrimps by just for retirement. And so for me, that just made me fall in love with entrepreneurship, because I was, again, these are the people who are job creators, right? Let's help the people who help everybody. So that's been the running theme around the people that I work with.
Beautiful. Yes, because they are those who are seeking the information, the methodologies, the strategies to really help to manage what they have so that they can help others to do the same. It's exactly what you talked about, the huge ripple effect. Mm-hmm. And so tell us then, how do we get into this whole thing about story leverage? One of the things I would imagine is these women who came to you for help were also women who said, my story is this. Now, with the knowledge that you have about me and my story, how can I use this in order to amass greater wealth, help more people, do more in my business, and help in the lives that I'm able to touch? So how does story leverage kind of take us in that direction?
Well, it's funny. Everybody thinks that their story is unique, that their particular circumstances are different. And one of the reasons why we don't share our fears and our doubts and our concerns with one another is because we think we're going to be found out. Like there's some unique secret that nobody knows and nobody else experiences. And if they only knew that I really don't have my stuff together, oh my God, it's going to fall apart. And when you open that Pandora's box, everybody's gift looks the same. It's like, oh, I have the same fears, I have the same concerns, I have the same worries. And so it's almost like a cosmic joke, right? So for me, how the story leverage thing came about, my business partner, David Bullock, brought to my attention a book called The 20 Master Plots. We were talking about, I've been studying, cosmology and mythology and The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell, etc., all under the umbrella of my comparative religions discipline. And as I brought this up to him, he brought up the 20 master plots. And something that he had read a long, long time ago, and he started thinking, listen, there's only one of 20 plots that somebody's in. And so I was thinking a myth like an archetype. He's thinking like the movement of the story, not just the character, right? The archetype is the character, but the plot is the movement of the story. And so we brought this stuff together, and we were like, so it's the same hero every single time, and he or she is only doing one of 20 things in their business or in their marriage or in their school or in their personal development, their weight loss journey, whatever circumstance or domain of mastery that you're seeking, it falls under one of those 20 categories or those 20 master plots. The author's last name is Tobias. You can look it up. I'm telling you, that's one of the books that you need to have in your success library, because when you start perusing it and you start thinking about what am I going to do about blah, 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 and you start perusing those plots, you're like, oh, oh, I'm in a validation plot, or oh, I'm in a, unrequited love plot, or whatever the case may be, right? Even those unrequited plots may apply to romantic relationships, but they may also apply to careers, like when you're going after a promotion and it just never comes. It's like this unrequited love that you're going after, your lover being your career or whatever, right? So when I started applying the generalities of archetypes and the generalities of plots to people's lives and businesses, I don't even know how to explain it, Lynn. It was like somebody just went and just opened up my brain and all these possibilities started opening up, because once you can see, this is one of the reasons why human beings learn by watching, because if you can detect patterns, then it's easier for you to navigate the world around you. And when I saw these patterns, I was like, oh, now I understand, the movement that goes through a human life. When you understand the archetypes and when you understand the 20 master plots, then you can organize yourself accordingly. So one of the things that I always tell people is that we live our lives not out of what happens in them, but out of our interpretation of what happens in them. And I've done this in other modules, but I'll do it again because it's a very powerful exercise. Anybody who's listening, if you have a piece of paper and a pen, I want you to draw 2 lines on the paper so that you create 3 columns, right? And on the left column, you write the word fact at the top. And on the right column, you write the word interpretation or story on the right. And you leave the middle column empty, right? So there's only 4 things that can fit in the fact column. It's what somebody said, what somebody didn't say, what somebody did, or what somebody didn't do. Now, a lot of times this can get tricky because sometimes we assess the way somebody did or didn't do, or the way somebody said or didn't say something, right? So, you might have said to me, Monikah, stop it. But then the way I tell the story is, Lynn just yelled at me out of nowhere. Well, that's not what happened. Right? Mm-hmm. All that happened was that Lynn said, Monikah, stop it. Now, everything else is what I interpreted, right? The story that I tell about the facts, right? So then, what happens? What's the colander? What's the filter in the middle that would have you take these raw ingredients called facts and turn them into a story and interpretation? And there are three filters through which you interpret all the facts that happen in your life. One is your 0 to 7 programming. The things that happened while you were, from the time that you were born to about the time that you were 7 years old, is part of your cellular memory and part of your unconscious memory. If you just think back to your childhood, you don't even start to remember things until you maybe were 4 at the earliest, 3 or 4 at the earliest, and even that is kind of shady. You don't really start to get memory until you're 6 or 7, right? But you know that you were alive when you were 3 months old, 2 days old, right? But you don't remember that stuff, and that's because you didn't yet have cognitive memory, but you had cellular memory, in your body, right? So if you can just imagine, if you were a baby and your babysitter, your grandmother, your aunt, or whoever was carrying you and maybe slipped and fell and dropped you, then that could explain why you're afraid of heights. You don't remember ever falling, right? But it's something that you carry in your body's memory, in your cellular memory. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So when you start kind of dissecting your life and the things that have happened in your, maybe at your office, at work, in business, in your relationships, etc., when you start filtering them and dissecting them through that 3-step process, that 3 columns that I just told you about, fact, interpretations, and filters, then you begin to distill the pieces that are limiting beliefs. So I told you that there are 3 filters that happen in the middle. 1 is your 0 to 7 programming. Mm-hmm. 2 is your assumptions. And 3, your conclusions. So here's what I mean by that. An assumption is something that you just treat it as though it is true, although it's really just a theory. It's really just a position, right? So, for example, I'll give you a really tactical example. I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic. And even though there are people in my country that look like you, that look like me, that look like Donald Trump, I didn't have a distinction of black and white because everybody in my country is Dominican, right? So I didn't have a distinction of black and white and light skin or dark skin until I came to this country. And I noticed that when people were talking about dark-skinned black people, they typically did it very tentatively, fearfully, derogatively, etc. So I made up in my mind as a child that the blacker the berry, I didn't complete it with the sweeter the juice. I completed it with the worse, right? So I didn't have any facts about it. I didn't have any evidence of it. It was just something that I kind of picked up in the water, right? And it wasn't until I realized that what that did was it created a thought in my subconscious, in my unconscious mind, that whoever was lighter skinned than I was maybe better, maybe smarter, maybe more prepared. And it took some untangling. You know, when I finally gave voice to it, that's why one of the, I'll give you the Thrive formula in a second, but the T in Thrive is tell the truth. And so when I started to tell the truth about my assumptions and the conclusions that I jumped to based on no evidence half of the time, then I started to unravel the paradigm of the world that I lived in. It's like, oh, you mean men aren't necessarily all good at finances like I thought my father was? You know, because my idea of a man was my dad, right? My idea of a woman is my mother. So when I saw their interaction, I made up, this is how men are, this is how women are. And this is how a marriage is supposed to work. When I saw, you know, their interaction, their dynamic. And we make up stuff like that all the time. And all of it happens around the time that you're 0 to 7 years old. So when you imagine having a map of the world that you decided you picked up when you were 6, and now you're 26, 36, 46, 56, and the map doesn't necessarily match the terrain. You know, it's like I give you a map of New York, but you're in Chicago. All of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, this isn't working, right? So it's the same thing with our relationships. You know, you have a map of assumptions and conclusions and cellular memory that you had when you were a child, but now you're an adult and you're inventing a future, but you're dragging the past with you, and we call that a story. Does that all make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the analogy. You're inventing the future, but you're dragging these things that you didn't realize that you were even creating at such a young age that now are really impacting the decisions that you're making. You know, especially if you came from a household where Dad had all the money, Mom had none, you thought, you know, as a woman, you weren't supposed to have any. And it became even more difficult when you weren't in a relationship where the man had the money.
Yeah.
And so I can totally see how all of these things come about. And when someone stands in the reality of today and starts thinking, oh my God, what has happened? What have I created? And how do I figure out how to get out of this? Because the other thing is, you mentioned patterns. When the patterns emerge, it is you seeing the patterns,
yes,
so that you can distinguish that they are in fact patterns. And then it's like, okay, why am I doing this? And I know a lot of people get stuck.
Yes.
I guess this is the way that I am. This is my story, and not that I'm choosing to stick to it like we often kid about, but this is my story, and I guess I'm stuck in it. So talk to us about how you kind of put those pieces in the right place, understand the story, and unravel the filter.
Yeah. So the first thing is that you have to understand that conclusions and assumptions are not wrong. They're mechanisms to define your own reality. right? And we talk about being Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote a lot of plays, a lot of tragedies, a lot of comedies, a lot of sonnets and poems, etc. But if you get into the story of Romeo and Juliet, and you assume the character of Juliet, there's only one way the story is going to end for you, my friend. And if you switch to Romeo, there's only one way the story is going to end for you as well.
Yeah.
But if you're Shakespeare, you have a gazillion different stories that you can write, that you can author, that the different directions that you can go. The pen is in your hand. And here's the thing. Whether you know it or not, you want to admit it or not, whether you own that power or not, you are Shakespeare. And every time that you decide to abscond or rescind your power, that's part of what you are authoring as well. Right? It's all of it is used. There are no vacuums in the universe. And so I'll say that then the decision as an author is, does this assumption, does this belief, does this conclusion, they're your basic ABCs, assumptions, beliefs, and conclusions, do these things forward me based on what I say that I want, based on what I say that I'm up to, or do they limit me? And if you realize that they limit you, then you have a different awareness now and you can make a different choice. You don't have to be stuck in that. And if you're now aware that they limit you and you continue to choose them, then they're no longer limiting because you're choosing them.
Yeah.
Now it's part of the toolbox. There's a point you're proving, there's a point you're making with the quality of your life. And so when you are deliberately aware of a limiting belief and you're still choosing it, you're making a point. Right? So I said in another call, in another conference, that 3 of the questions that I use to move myself from a stuck place, and again, this goes back to assumptions. I have an assumption out of which I live my life that says that I am a stream of divinity, I'm a child of God. And so is everybody else. Like, this isn't just a Monikah thing, right? Everybody's a child of God. And so, given that I am made in the image and likeness of God with the powers and privileges that a child would have bestowed upon them, then that means that just the same way that God creates universes, I create my universe. And I can uncreate my universe. I can create something else. And so when I walk around saying I'm stuck, I'm stuck, I'm stuck, I'm stuck, I'm stuck, one of the questions that I use is, who's speaking? Because if I'm speaking as identifying as a child of God, would God ever say that? Would God ever say, I don't know what I'm doing? Would God ever say, I should be fired from my job? Would God ever say I don't have what it takes? Would God ever say I don't have any money? Would God ever say, do you know what I mean? So it's like, if it's not true of God, then it can't possibly be true of you. Now, that's not necessarily truth with a capital T, but it's an assumption that I'm choosing to make because it works for me. It makes my life sweeter, right?
Yes, yes.
So that's question number 1, is who's speaking. And then the second one is, so what? Now what? You know? It's like, all right, so you're stuck. Now what? Because we can just continue to be here, stuck, and dip even further into the quicksand of your stuckness, or you can make a different choice. What are we gonna do? You know? How much time do you need for your pity party? I remember my best friend, bless her soul, she passed away in November, when we had beautiful years and years and years of sweet sisterhood and friendship. And I remember one time I was going for something, I think it was an award or something, and I really wanted it. And I didn't get it. And I was sulking, and I was, mad at the world, and just don't bother me, And I shut out the world, and I wasn't answering phone calls, I wasn't responding to emails, I was ignoring texts, etc. So she barged into my house because she had a key. And she saw me in my bed, and she opens up the curtains, and she takes my covers off, and she's like, tell me how much time you need to finish this pity party. And then we're going to get up and we're going to go to the beach. And I was like, give me an hour. Because you know
Uh-huh.
you can't be all messy and snotty when you go to the beach. You gotta get yourself together. So the reason I'm bringing up that story is because when you lift your level of awareness, when you finally know better, you're at choice to do better. It doesn't necessarily, it's not always true. People say when you know better you do better. Well,
When
I
you choose
don't know.
to. Yeah.
Right? That depends on how you define knowing, because if knowing is just a conceptual exercise, it's not always true that when you know better, you do better. But when knowing is a function of your experience and it's like in your bones and this is something that you're completely embodying and you own it completely, then yes, by that definition, when you know better, you do better, right? So, and then the third question, I said the first question is who's speaking. The second question is so what, now what? And then the third question is what's your point? I mentioned that earlier. It's like what's your point? What point are you making about your life by having that account balance in your checking account? What point are you making about your life by having the quality of your marriage or your relationship with your children or with your boss or with your clients be the way that it is? Because you're making a point. So all you're doing now is just raising your level of awareness and owning it and telling the truth about it. Some people get stuck in that feast and famine thing for years before they actually break through to abundance in their business. And the point that they sometimes are making is, I don't have what it takes, or I don't know how to do this. Nobody taught me how to do this, which of course implies that the only way you can do something is by having somebody teach you. Like, you can't learn it yourself. Well, why is that not an assumption, right? And so when you start dissecting things like that, and you start asking those questions to shift you out of whatever stuckness that you may be, now you begin to create and have access to the tools to author a new story. And when you know what the archetype is and you know what the master plot is, then you're like, oh, okay, yeah, this story's not working. I can invent another one. And it's just the ultimate freedom, because now there's no reason to get mad, because you're authoring the whole thing. I mean, imagine Shakespeare writing the Romeo and Juliet tragedy, and Romeo is about to pick up this weapon. And imagine as he's writing it, he's like, no, Romeo, don't do it. You're going to die. Are you kidding me? You're writing this. You know what's going to happen. So write something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I already wrote it. So then what do? Erase it. Tear it up. Throw that page in the fire.
Yes. Invent a new future.
Yes. Yes. I love it. I love it. And it seems to also be an easy process to go through. One of the things, I say easy, I probably should have said simple.
Yeah.
Because one of the things people automatically jump to is, I can see this happening. I see what you're talking about. I don't have the time. And what would what do you say to the person who's just thinking that it's such a monumental task to, peel the layers of the onion and get to what can really, unstuck stuckness, fix themselves, seeing themselves as broken?
Right. So I would just interrupt that. You don't have the time to not be dysfunctional? You don't have the time to not be broke? Like, what's the alternative here? And sometimes we've just got to walk ourselves down the rabbit hole of our own arguments until you just laugh yourself out of your own absurdity. Because, like, what am I really saying here? Like, because it took time for you to get to where you are. It wasn't like you just popped the donut and then all of a sudden now you're 100 pounds overweight. That's not how it happens, right? So if you were available to give time to dig your own grave, why aren't you available to give time to dig yourself out? Why not? Because there's an answer to that. Maybe the answer is I don't think I deserve it, or maybe I don't know how to do it, or what I need help and I'm afraid to admit it. Whatever it is, the T and Thrive tell the truth. And when you can begin to tell the truth and own it, you know, I don't want to, because sometimes, you know, sometimes this is what we do, especially as women. We want someone else to suffer for where we are. You know, I'll speak for myself. My aunties and my mom and the elders in my family, we joke about that. You know, that it's like we do the Catholic guilt trip thing, you know, and it's like, look at all I've done for you as your mother, and la la la, and it's like, oh, okay, so I'm supposed to flagellate now because you made a choice about what kind of mother you wanted to be, you know. So it's funny when we talk about it now, but when you're in it, you know, it's like you do feel that guilt and that anger and that resentment, and how do you get out of it? Because sometimes the quicksand is your own emotions, right? And so, you know, one of the things that I talk about with my clients, when we talk about the domains of mastery, you know, our company is called CEO Mastery, and we have domains of mastery, and those domains of mastery correspond to the energy centers in your body, the chakras, or energy meridians. And so when we talk about money, that corresponds to, for example, to the root chakra of survival and of being here. And a lot of the conversation about money is unconsciously a conversation about your right to be here. And sometimes I'll take my clients through an exercise where they'll tell their biography in periods of 7, right? Some 0 to 7, and then 8 to 14, and then 15 to 21, and so forth. And they'll start to notice that when they write down the biggest thing that happened to them that year and what they made up about it, they'll start to notice those patterns. Wow, in every 7-year period, on year 3, everything broke down. Or on year 5, that's when I got a big achievement. Or on year 2, that's when I, you know, met someone that helped me along my path, or whatever, right? So when you start seeing those patterns, you can start walking towards your life with a little more confidence. You know, I just did this exercise at the new year, and I noticed that I was in a 5-year, and I was like, oh, yeah, this is the year when things just blow up for me, and it's just like great, and you know, just 5th gear, and just all engines running or whatever. So I'm just gearing up for 2015 to be amazing. But that's because I know my patterns, you know. And in contrast, year 3 and 4 suck. They're just horrible. But if you don't know your patterns, you're like, oh, why am I going through this? And when is this going to end? And blah, blah, blah. When you know your patterns, you're like, you know what? This too shall pass. And you can author it with more empowered knowledge because you understand what season and what cycle you're in. You can imagine how frustrating it is to try to wear a bikini and suntan in the middle of winter when you live in Chicago or New York or whatever. It's like, it's not going to happen. And you're thinking you're doing something wrong. No, it's just not the time to do that. There's nothing wrong. It's just not the time. Wait a few months. So it's the same thing when you're building your business. You're thinking, oh, I'm supposed to, you know, go public and have an IPO. But you just made your first $1,000. Give it a minute. You know? Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. I love that. Just seeing the possibilities and the exercise that you talked about, being able to really unveil what those patterns are for yourself so that you can move in a more empowered way. Beautiful. Now, you made a couple of references to the THRIVE acronym. So do you want to give us a little more there?
Sure. So THRIVE is a 6-step process. And I used the term, even though last year I did a conference called Flourish, but I wanted to stay with the word thrive that I started using with When Women Thrive movement. Because flourishing, I think, implies like it's always growing, and it's always growing beautifully. And sometimes our lives aren't that picturesque. They're not always that cute and graceful. But even the dark moments and even the shadow moments are useful, relevant, practical, and actually gifts in disguise if you really think about it, especially when you put your life in perspective, right? So to give you an example, in my early 20s, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cervical cancer, and I was given about a year to live. And that was the year that I started my business. That was the year that I got really clear about owning the responsibility of my own health was in my hands, not in somebody else with a lab coat, that didn't know my body and just knew what they knew, but they didn't know me. They didn't know what I believed and the power of belief in self-healing. If you would have asked me as a 23, 24-year-old what the role of cancer was in my life, I would have said this is the worst thing that has ever happened to me. Now, looking back on it several years later, people call it a cancer survivor, I would say it's the best thing that ever happened to me. But the only reason why I'm able to say something different about it is because I have more perspective. And I can see, looking back, what that was the catalyst for, right? So the T in Thrive stands for tell the truth. And that means owning your story and owning all of it. And being honest and thorough and clean about all of it. And what I mean by that is, sometimes we'll tell the story of how a business failed, or a marriage failed, or maybe we have an estranged relationship with one of our children. And we say it as though the problem is over there. My business partner took me for a ride, or, my husband was a jerk, and blah, blah, blah. And we don't speak about our role in creating this. Because remember, you're the author, you're Shakespeare. The pen is in your hand. Now, you may not necessarily be in control of what happened, but you are in control of your response to it and what you have to say about it. That is in your domain of jurisdiction. So you can, the way that to tell the truth about it is, for example, if a business partner, maybe they did embezzle money, maybe they did steal it. Guess what that means? I didn't do my homework. And when I saw red flags, I ignored them. And when there was a chance to confront them, I didn't want to because it was uncomfortable and it was painful and I didn't want it to be true. See, all of that is underneath the whole, this jerk ran away with my money, And so when we begin to tell the truth, we set ourselves free, because then the next time that you're confronted with something like that, you won't be had again because you have thoroughly distilled and examined this thing and told the truth about it, So the H in Thrive stands for honor your tags, and that's kind of like an acronym within an acronym, because tags stands for your talents, abilities, gifts, and skills. And I imagine, if you could just imagine people, leaders, peak performers going through a factory line, and God just tagging them a particular way, right? So this person has the gift of gab, and they can just be on stage and just rouse up thousands of people. And then there's somebody else who doesn't do that on a stage. But when you get them one-to-one, man, they could just change your life, and that's their gift, right? Or somebody may have a talent for numbers, and they can just, I'm not a bookkeeper, but I'll save you some money on your taxes, because I'm just good with it like that, right? So when you know what your talents, abilities, gifts, and skills are, and you begin to honor them instead of fighting them or denying them or minimizing them, then you're on your way to thriving. The I stands for integrating the law of gender. Now, of course, as you can see, each one of these can be like a module or a retreat in and of themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
But integrating the law of gender means everything in this world of duality has a masculine and a feminine aspect to it. Human beings do, animals do, flowers do. Everywhere you look, there's a masculine and a feminine aspect. And I'm not talking about man and woman. I'm talking about energy. And so the masculine energy is very linear and out there and activity and result oriented, and sometimes men display this by okay, just bottom line it for me, what do you want me to do? And women, sometimes when you're in your feminine, you're like, well, but I don't want you to do anything, I'm supposed to listen, right? It's not about the result, it's about the process, right? And so you've got to integrate the law and know when one is useful and when one is not. So you have feminine intuition and emotion and vision and compassion, and all of that is useful and it has its place. And the masculine of activity and achievement and competition, all of that is also useful and it has its place. I think sometimes we tend to, by honoring the feminine, displace or dishonor the masculine, and that's just as ineffective, I think. So one clue, if you can just notice the anatomy of a female and the anatomy of a male in the human body, the human male anatomy is outside, right? And the human female anatomy is inside. I'm talking about the reproductive organs, right? So that's a clue. The feminine goes inside, goes indoors, is receptive, and then pushes something out to creation. Whereas the masculine is like, nope, I'm going to go get it. I'm going to go get it, you know? And so you've got to know, all right, which energy do I need to use here? Because if you have all your limbs, then you have a right hand and a left hand. Sometimes there's some things that you do with your left hand, and that's what you do with the left, and then there's some things that you do with the right hand. But you still have both hands. Neither one of them is wrong. It's just which one is most useful at the time, right? And you have one that's dominant. So just because you're a man doesn't mean that your masculine energy is the dominant. You know, there are a lot of men who have feminine energy as their dominant because they're receptive and they're intuitive and they're more about the vision than they are about the doing this, right? And the same thing with women. There's a lot of women who are very masculine. So that's the I. And then the V is validate the vision. So once you started to tell the truth and getting clear about where you are, and you've gotten clear about your tags, and you've set the context of using the masculine and feminine energy, now let's make sure that everything that your vision is still accurate. It's still useful. It's still relevant to you. It's still honest, right? So validating the vision just really means, is this what you're up to, right? Every time that if you've ever gotten lost in the middle of a highway and you call someone for directions, I'm trying to get to Miami, and I'm trying to get to such and such street. The first thing that they ask you is, well, where are you now? I can't help you get there until I know where you are.
Right.
So it's the same thing with validating your vision. Once you understand where you are, now you can craft a map to get to point B. Now you have a map to get to where you want to go. And then the E, of course, now that you've gotten all that clear, now it's time to implement the law of Goya, and that's another acronym. The E is for execute. Execute the law of Goya, and that means get off your assets. Now it's time to do. Now it's time to achieve. Now it's time to get it cracking. Now it's time to do some stuff. Now it's time to call people, send the email, go to the meeting, fly to the conference, etc. There's a doingness that's part of this. You cannot thrive in your mind. We live in a dual universe, so as above, so below. That means if you have it in your mind and it hasn't come yet in manifestation, it's not done yet, right? So it's like, imagine if you're putting all these, the eggs and the flour and the milk and the sugar and da-da-da, and you leave it in the oven and you don't turn the oven on. Hello, there's no cake yet, right? So there's got to be movement, and that's that Thrive formula. So once you begin to go through those steps, in whatever, in a launch, in starting your business, in designing the way that you want to raise your children with your husband, because how you do anything is how you do everything. This isn't just a business strategy thing. This is about how you live your life. And if you're the kind of person who is a leader in your personal life but not your business life, then it's incomplete. And vice versa. If you're a leader in your business life but not your personal life, it's incomplete. And so when you use the Thrive formula and you're very clear about how to leverage your story, you are miles ahead of everybody else. And it's really the raw ingredients that it takes to self-actualize. Some people call it soul ascension, some people call it evolution, some people call it, like the Maslow students call it self-actualization, right? So you're miles ahead on that path.
That is beautiful, beautiful. And wrapping this all up, really make the connection for us about Thrive and going through this Thrive process, where story actually intersects and is the most important place to pay attention to story, maybe.
Say that again. You cut out a little bit. Tie what together?
The story leverage.
Mm-hmm.
thrive, and story. You kind of mentioned them in a couple of places, but where's the most important place to look to really understand that story? Is it actually at the front with telling the truth? Is it
Yeah.
all the way through? Where's the biggest impact?
Well, they kind of dance together. Story leverage and the Thrive formula kind of dance together, and it's almost like the if you've ever seen anybody dance Latin genre music like merengue or salsa, right? There's something that the man does and there's something that the woman does, and if you get those two mixed up, you're gonna look stupid at the dance floor, right? So, so it's the same thing with story leverage. Imagine story being the feminine, because now you're setting context, you're establishing that vision, right? You're determining which archetype am I living out of, which master plot am I living out of. All of that, it's like imagine creating a womb for your new vision or your new reality to be born, and that's what story leverage is about. And then you use the Thrive formula to achieve it. You know, it's like that's the seed that goes in the earth. That's the seed that goes in the soil so that you can plant a new life, new tree, new garden.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, that just brings it all together. I am so
Wraps
excited.
it up with a little bow.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Now, I know that you have a couple of programs and things where you work with small groups.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have something that you would want to tell our audience about?
Yeah, if you go to, I don't know if it's actually on my screen, but if you go to monikahogando.com/gift, you will get I call it the Thrive Manifesto, because I go through all of this stuff in more detail. It's a free digital book that you can begin to, it's a kind of like a digital course, really, if you think about it, because there's some audio pieces to it as well. But it's a great way to start learning more about this. I go more into depth about the archetypes. There's 4 archetypes for the masculine, 4 archetypes for the feminine, and what the 20 master plots are. You can always go buy the book and read that. I'll give you the Cliff Note version and the Thrive Manifesto. And then all the exercises that I mentioned that go into depth about how to do them and how to interpret them and how to use them to forward you and to interrupt whatever limiting beliefs you may have. So it's like a mini personal development training, and it's available on monikahogando.com/gift.
And it will also be available on the permissionmovement.org/store. Gosh, what are we going to call this one, Monica?
I think it is story
Right.
leverage.
I think we've already got story leverage with what David brought to the group. So we'll make this one thrive.
Let's do that. Let's do Thrive formula or something like that.
Okay, thrive formula. And with that said, I mean, it's really amazing to see a couple of things happen here. One being that we're able to create this whole, get connected with Monikah. How are we going to do that and create that right here? So the story that we tell is that as creators, you can write it however you want to write it, when you choose to write it. And I want our audience to know that, because that's what the permission movement is all about. Give yourself permission to say, this isn't what's working for me. This is what's working for me. This is what's going to make this work for us. This is, just think more in terms of giving yourself permission to really understand your story so that you are so much more empowered to write your new story. It's difficult to write a story if you don't have a fresh piece of paper or you don't have an eraser so that you can erase that last line. So this is what the permission movement has been all about and will continue to be about. And you'll continue to hear from us as we're talking about ways to give yourself permission. One of the ways to give yourself permission is to take the T in Thrive. Tell the truth. Tell the truth first to yourself so that you can come into alignment with how you are going to tell the truth about other things as well. And I love the way that you talked about Pandora's box. You know, we're thinking that our stuff is so unique that, you know, it's going to open up the box and, oh my God, all my stuff's going to fly out and it's not going to be like anybody else's. Well, welcome to the real world. You are not alone. Don't think that you're alone any longer. And that, too, is what the permission movement is all about. The Permission to Be Powerful book was written by women entrepreneurs for women entrepreneurs, and we would love for you to help us to get this book to you, as well as to these groups of girls and women who we were talking about. And in doing so, we're looking at, you know, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, if the villagers aren't participating, what's going to happen to the children? And we are the villagers. So let's do our part. Spread the word about the movement. Spread the word about today's module, because this was some seriously great stuff. Thank you, Monikah.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay, parting and final thoughts. What would you like for our audience to know that is the best parting thought here?
I am fond of honoring the sacredness of the words I am. And I challenge everybody that's listening, when you hear yourself saying I am whatever, ask yourself if that would be true of God. Would that be true of God when you say I am broke, or I am tired, or I don't know what I'm doing? Anytime that you use the I, but specifically with the I am, I'm clueless, you know, when you say things like that. If you change the I am for God is, would it still make sense? You know, change I am broke to God is broke. Say I am clueless to God is clueless. If it doesn't make sense to you about God, it shouldn't make sense to you about yourself. So you just shift it. And that was, I'm giving it to you because that has been one of the most powerful self-grounding, self-shifting exercises that I have ever been given. And it completely has opened the doors to own my power, not from a place of hubris, not from a place of arrogance, but from a place of like, wow, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. And how arrogant of me to think that my opinion of myself is more authoritative than the one who created me. You know? So that's my challenge to people. Whether you believe in God or not, you call it universe, you call it energy, whatever it is that you call it. There are no atheists on you know, falling planes. And so use that. And even if there isn't, you know, there's some people that are like, well, I don't believe in God, but you believe in yourself, don't you? So you can use that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Monikah. Thank you for being here with us today. I am grateful that God has not just created you, but created this movement so that so many other women, so many other girls can get this information, hear these stories, hear the hearts of the women who and men who have come forth to be a part of this permission movement experience. And I'm very grateful. And I'm so grateful to our audience for joining us today. I want you to think about joining us on Thursday, 12 noon Eastern, because that's going to be our final module. And we're going to kick it up a notch and just have a party. And we'd love to be a part of that story. We're going to be inviting people into the Hangout to join us. And we want you to share in that with us. So if you're there and you'd like to join us for a moment after, we're going to do an after show for about 5 minutes, and love to invite you. I'm going to put the link here out there for you, and I would just say, come on in.
The water's fine.
It has been such a pleasure to bring the permission movement to each and every one of you. And thanks for joining us today. And we will see you again soon. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.